Hello everybody and welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. We have several reviews to get to, so we're going to jump right into them. This first batch of reviews comes from Reaper's Legendary Encounters line, and 4 new models have hit the shore. These are pre-painted plastic models, and the first one is a unicorn. It is painted in a light blue and almost white, chalky white color, and you can tell that it was painted black first and then painted in the light blue and then dry brushed in the white. It looks very decent. I don't really have any problem with it. I might change one thing on it, and that would be to add some color to the hooves because they're left the same black as the base coat of the figure. And I originally thought that the eyes were left black also, but there's a tiny dot of blue on the eye itself. I might use a lighter blue just to accentuate that and bring it out a little bit more. The horn is a brown and gold color, and one thing that's really good about this, you could sit it right on a cavalry base if you wanted to use it in Warlord or maybe Warhammer Fantasy, and it would be pretty easy to convert this into a mount for any kind of maiden figure or damsel or something like that. There was one small area where the paint was scuffed on the right hand side, but that could easily be fixed with a little bit of white or by putting a rider on the model. The next model in this batch is a young dragon. I would say it's a red dragon by the color of it, and if you take away the wings and tail for a second, it's about the size of a large horse, so it fits in perfectly as a young dragon. If you drop it on a 40mm base, it would be perfect for D&D or Pathfinder or pretty much any kind of role-playing game. You don't need to do that, but I would just for my game. The red and the yellow on the wings could use a little bit of a wash, so I'll probably do that before I start using them. You don't have to, the colors are fine, but to bring out a little more depth in them, I would wash it. Straight out of the package, the wings were very close together, but once I took him out and let him sit on my desk for a while, they separated a little bit, so there's a little more distance between them, so they don't look quite as scrunched together. And overall, it's a really decent dragon model. Next up is a female vampire, and out of the 4 of these, I think she could use the most touch-up work because there was some overpainting in areas, and her flesh could use a wash or maybe some highlighting just to help define it a little better. In my opinion, the star of this batch of Legendary Encounters releases is the Gargoyle. This is a really excellent figure. It's a single-piece figure, like all other Legendary Encounters models, but he has 2 large wings that stick out behind him, and he's got both of his arms up, and he's sitting on a rocky perch, and his stony skin was painted really well considering it's a mass-produced, pre-painted figure. It looks like stone, but there's enough highlighting to have the ridges stand out from it, and there's appropriate shading in the recesses of where it's cracked along the wings. My only issue with the figure is it's a little bit back heavy to where it has a tendency to fall backwards if it's moved at all in that direction, but it's still my favorite figure out of this batch. Okay, now we have 2 Pathfinder figures to look at, and the first is Kyra, or maybe it's Kira, and she's the female iconic cleric of the line, and she immediately struck me as having sort of a Middle Eastern or desert dweller appearance to her. She's carrying a holy symbol up in her right hand, and her left is holding her somewhat curved sword. She's wearing chain armor with some robes, and it's accentuated with lots of little trinkets and tassels and jewels here and there on it, but not a whole lot of other adventuring gear that you can see. She has a broad face with large eyes that should be easy to pick out when you're painting it. It's a single piece model, so there were no assembly issues or anything. There were some faint mold lines across the top of her arms and then down below on the underside of her arms, but these were pretty faint and cleaned up pretty quickly. Next up is Seijin, and he's the iconic monk of the Pathfinder line. He's sculpted in a very cool martial arts kind of pose where he's holding his sword out with his right hand and his left hand is up, sort of in an on guard position. He's not really wearing much armor, but you'd expect that from a monk, but he does look like he's wearing heavy leather sleeves on his arms. He's got a skirt on and then leather boots. Around the skirt itself there are some bits of gear, including what looks like a small flask and maybe a scroll caddy and a length of rope, but what really stood out to me on the miniature are how well detailed the muscles are, especially his abdominal muscles, without being overblown and cartoony. On the back you can see the muscles defined, and none of it looks out of proportion or overblown at all. There were some mold lines on the underside of his arms and a faint one across the top of his head, but they cleaned up pretty easily and he was ready to glue to the base and prime in just a couple of minutes. The last figure that we're going to review this episode before we get back into learning how to play Warlord is a Yeti Shaman, and he is going to be part of one of the new armies in the Savage North expansion for Warlord, but until then you can use him as a Yeti Shaman, and he comes in 2 pieces, and he also comes with a square 40mm plastic base. I couldn't find a mold line at all anywhere on the model except for down on the necklace where those large teeth are on the necklace. There were mold lines visible on those, but nowhere else on the model, and any Any other cleanup was limited to bits of flash here and there. The staff was bent a little bit in the package, so I had to carefully straighten that out. His right arm that's holding the staff fits perfectly into place up at the shoulder of the body, and once you have him assembled, the model has a very good aggressive sense of motion and animation to it. He looks very fierce and imposing and would be a very good enemy in a D&D game if you weren't going to use him in a Warlord army. Okay, we're going to get back into learning more about how to play Warlord, and we're still talking about actions. We're going to move into the charge action now, which is going to be similar to the move action that we already looked at. A charge action is what you're going to use to get your figures into base-to-base contact with the enemy figures so you can get into hand-to-hand combat, and the basis for a charge move is going to be your MOV value that's on the data cards that we've already looked at. Here we have some bugbears that are going to try to pick a fight. Not unusual for bugbears. There's a bugbear bully. And they're going to mix it up with some ice demons from the Darkspawn army that I've been building recently. For the purposes of this example, we'll say the bugbears have a regular move rate of 5. So for a charge, we start off moving him 5 inches. Now he looks like he's short of his target, but with a charge move, you get an extra 2-inch move at the end of the 5, or your base move, if you're not in base-to-base contact when you complete the first part of your move. So these bugbears are getting their 5-inch regular move, and since they're not in base-to-base at the end of that, you automatically get a 2-inch sort of follow-up move at the end that helps you close with your enemy. Now you only get the follow-up move if it'll get you into base-to-base with your enemy, but it is a little extra boost of movement to get you there. And then up top here we have the same thing going on, where we're going to start off with our base 5-inch move and get our 2-inch charge follow-up to get into base-to-base contact. Something special about the charge action that doesn't apply to other actions is that you can do it twice if you need to. And what I mean is, if you use your first charge action and you end up not being in base-to-base contact with the enemy after your first one is done, if you have a second action remaining, you can use the charge action again to try to move into base-to-base contact. Next up is the rally action, and this is another one that can only be used by warlords and captains. And by the warlord or captain using a rally action, it allows all of the soldier and elite models in their troop to immediately make a discipline check with a +1 bonus to try to get rid of the shaken effect that they're currently suffering under. So if you have a whole troop of models that are currently wetting themselves and just getting beaten to the ground, that's a good time for your warlord or captain to use a rally action. A run action is a special kind of movement action, and it's one that can only be done if you've already used a regular move action at the beginning of an activation. So to use a run, first you're going to have to move as your first action for this activation. So let's say that you have an MOV of 5 and you've used a move action, so first you've moved 5 inches, and then you decide you're going to run, so you use your MOV again. You move another 5 inches, and because you run as your second action, you get an extra 2 inches on the end of your move. So if you have a regular MOV of 5 and you run for the turn, you're going to end up moving 12 inches. The next action we're going to look at is the regroup action. This is something that only leaders can perform, and essentially what it does, it allows a leader model to put together 2 troops worth of models who've taken significant casualties and really have them under 1 troop now that he's leading. There are some restrictions to the regroup action. The leader model that's performing it can't be in base-to-base contact with an enemy. The troop being absorbed has to be leaderless and cannot have activated yet this turn. And the total number of combined models that are going to be in the new troop cannot exceed the troop capacity of the leader that's trying to regroup everybody. So you can't really use the regroup action to build super huge troops of models that you couldn't have legally bought when you were creating the army, but if the new troop that you're building through use of the regroup action would be too large for the leader, you can choose to throw away some of the troops, but at that point you really are throwing models away, so you have to kind of weigh whether it's beneficial or not to use the regroup action to combine a troop and bolster its strength, or just leave some depleted ones as they are. The last type of action we'll talk about right now is the specialty action, and what this does, it allows a model to use a special ability or an action that's conferred because of a special ability as if they were just performing another action like ones we've already talked about. There are dozens of special abilities in the game, and you'll see these used when we get into some battle reports and combat examples over the next several episodes. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of Reaper Minis TV.